Hey everybody, welcome into the Film and Whiskey Podcast. This is a bonus episode. Usually we deliver content to you on Mondays, but we're going to start doing a little something to reward our faithful listeners. Every couple weeks we're going to drop an episode on Thursday, and it's going to be a little bit differently formatted from our regular episodes.
Yeah, this is a special opportunity to hear about somebody's favorite movie, but not just anybody. We're going to be interviewing people who are the owners, CEOs,
the head distillers of some local distilleries here in Ohio. Absolutely. So we're local to Ohio. We're based here, and we wanted to give local distilleries the opportunity to talk about what it's like to be on a smaller scale than some of the big Kentucky guys, to produce small batch bourbons and whiskeys and talk about their process. And so the first one that we reached out to was actually Cleveland Whiskey in the beautiful city of Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, Ohio is like the unsung hero of the world.
Of the world.
Of the world.
Of the galaxy.
What a great city.
Absolutely. And Cleveland whiskey has become famous or notorious, I guess, in some circles because they are introducing this new way of doing whiskey.
Well, Bob, how long does bourbon always sit in its barrel for?
Well, bourbon, to be called bourbon, right? I'm pretty sure it has to be 2 years.
Yeah, but good ones...
To get the Kentucky straight bourbon certification. Technically, to be called bourbon, you can put it in a barrel for 5 seconds, and it's bourbon.
Right.
So what Tom Lix, the CEO of Cleveland Whiskey, and his people are doing is they found a way with machinery and with really interesting chemistry to rapidly age their spirits using oak, using barrels, but infusing it in a way that gives it the character of at least a 2-year-old whiskey, but in a matter of days, essentially.
It's truly a fascinating process. And as Bob said, it's notorious. This is something completely new that has never been done before in the whiskey world.
And of course, it's getting tons and tons of pushback from traditionalists. So what we did is we went and sat down with Tom, and I interviewed him about what's it been like to try to break into this game of making whiskey? What's it been like to kind of be the pariah or the black sheep of the group, but also to carve out his own niche and his own following. And then we said, hey, we're the Film and Whiskey Podcast. We're not the Whiskey Podcast.
That's right.
Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about your all-time favorite movie?
And the fun fact is, Tom's voice is 1,000,000 times better than Bob or my own.
Oh, for sure.
So you guys are just going to absolutely love this episode.
What you're going to see, or I guess what you're going to hear over the next couple episodes that when we deliver bonus content to you, is we're going to have a series that we're calling My Favorite Movie. And what we're doing is Brad or I are going to interview the CEOs of these different distilleries, ask them about their process, but then ask them to tell us about, hey, growing up or as an adult, what's a movie that's been near and dear to your heart? And over a nice glass of whiskey, we'll discuss it. So sit back, enjoy the first episode of My Favorite Movie, starring our friend, Tom Lix.
Tom Lix.
So I wanted to ask about the Cleveland part of Cleveland Whiskey, because the more I look at the company, the more it doesn't seem like it's an accident that it's here in Cleveland. I think it really embodies sort of the blue-collar, scrappy nature of the city. And could you have planted it elsewhere? And was this an intentional choice to put it here in Cleveland?
Well, so that's sort of interesting. I'm actually from Boston.
Oh, okay.
I moved here to Cleveland about 12 years ago. My mom was born and raised here. She went to Cleveland State. It was Fenn College at the time. Met my father, who was from the East Coast. They got married, moved out to the East Coast, and I had never lived here. Mm-hmm. She moved out here just about 12 years ago, got ill. She was going to go into a nursing home. So my wife and I decided we were going to move here, take care of her, and ultimately move her. We were actually in the process of moving to Washington State. I had some land out there where we were going to build a distillery. Mm-hmm. Wound up here, fell in love with the place. I think it's an absolutely marvelous city with all sorts of opportunity. In fact, it reminds me of Boston 50 years ago. Well, it is. You think of all the parallels. Boston and Cleveland were both these world-class industrial cities that fell on hard times. Mm-hmm. Boston and Cleveland both had empty industrial buildings that were built to last and could be repurposed. Boston and Cleveland both have an educated workforce, both blue collar and white collar, and you really need them both to make a good entrepreneurial ecostructure. We had both had significant pollution problems. The difference is that Boston got over theirs. They corrected it and they stopped talking about it. One of the problems I think Cleveland still has, as this is my name. This, I am truly a citizen of Cleveland, but I wish we would stop talking about the pollution of the Cuyahoga River. It's done. Nobody else talks about it unless we bring it up.
Sure.
The other thing, and it was funny, I mentioned this to Mayor Jackson when he was here doing a little tour. And I said the other problem and the other thing that had to change in both Boston and Cleveland was they both had a history of corrupt local government. Now, he cringed when I said that, but I explained, look, I'm talking about a history of corrupt local government. And the problem was in Boston, nothing got done until you fix the corruption. And I think that was the case here in Cleveland and certainly in Cuyahoga County and the whole thing. I said, so I look and I drive around neighborhoods. The beauty of GPS is I don't mind getting lost anymore. I can turn down a street and know I can always get back to someplace. Right. But it's I just think there's so many parallels, and we're making all these changes. And Cleveland is certainly a city that is coming into its own once again. You know how people talk about, gee, if I could only go back in time, I'd buy Microsoft stock, and now I'd be really wealthy. Coming to Cleveland from Boston is like that opportunity to go back a little bit and say, I know what this city's going to become. I know I can make investments here. I can build a business here. I can raise my family here. This is a wonderful place to be. So people always ask, well, when did you come back to Cleveland? Because the assumption is you came back.
Right.
I was never here. But this is my adopted home. I think it's a phenomenal city. Couldn't be in a better place.
And I think one of the things that I've noticed about the spirit of your company in relation to Cleveland for so long was trying to become other cities. I feel like they were pursuing, how did Boston get back on the map? Let's take that tack. And I think now Cleveland is really focusing on what do we do well and how do we carve out our own niche? Yeah. And that really brings me to, I read an article online from CNET. There's an interview from 2016, and the article started with the line, Cleveland whiskey has won 4 gold medals, which I assume it's more at this point.
Yeah, we've won probably 70 or more medals.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. No, so let's change that. 70 gold medals. It has also been called the world's most hated whiskey among traditional bourbon drinkers. Right. What's it been like to try to break into this boys club of whiskey traditionalists?
Well, I think that, we accept the fact that, okay, so we're heretics. You think we're heretics. We are changing an industry. We're disrupting the industry. It's funny thinking of Boston again. I remember reading an article, and this was an old article. In fact, it was on microfiche, which some of your listeners won't even know what microfiche is, but it was on, and it was an editorial in an old Boston paper, and it was talking about the travesty and the immorality of allowing internal combustion engines and automobiles on the streets of Boston. And the conclusion was that the only moral and appropriate way to work on getting from point A to point B faster was to focus on breeding faster horses. That was it. So very resistant to change. And that's certainly been true with the airplane, microwave ovens, all sorts of things that have changed our lives, cell phones.
Absolutely.
And so this is a disruption, and certainly it angers some people who have investments, and they've either invested themselves knowledge-wise or emotionally or in their business, and this changes everything. And we've become more accepted as we've done things that are a little outside the mainstream. So one of the things that we can do that's different using our technology is use woods that you can't really make barrels out of. We've been using oak barrels, European oak and American white oak, for many, many generations, probably 2,000 years or more. And we continued using them because they hold liquid. They were storage containers. They weren't meant to really give flavor to anything, but they give 60 to 80% of the flavor into any sort of whiskey. That's where it all comes from. But I can use woods like black cherry, which if you built a barrel out of, it would leak like a sieve. We use apple and hickory and sugar maple, experiment with pistachio and mango and all these other great woods. So we're getting a little bit of grudging respect now. So it's changing a little bit.
That's great news. And I wanted to ask about the different wood varieties you're using. Of your whole line, including the Cleveland Underground line that you have now, do you have a favorite personal variety, and why?
So, that's an interesting question, and people ask me that a lot. I think I wouldn't bring it on the market if I didn't like it.
Sure.
I think they're all very different, so it depends on the occasion, what food I'm eating, whatever. I think, we make a a bourbon that we finished with black cherry wood, no sugar, no syrup, no artificial flavor or color. And I think that's one of the best things we make. Black cherry wood just seems to have this great flavor to it. It's not like the fruit, but it's really a great, beautiful, sweet flavor. We just released a rye that's finished with black cherry wood as well. We do experimentation all the time. So I don't have to put things in a barrel and, test them after 4 years and try them again at 6 and maybe at 8 years say, hey, that's pretty good. I can make some more. I can test daily on the things we produce. We did a bourbon that we finished with olive wood once. It was beautiful. It was buttery. It was smooth. I mean, unfortunately, as I assessed it, I said, this tastes wonderful, but it's never going to sell because nobody's going to want to buy something that says it's finished with olive wood. But we get to try all sorts of different things here, and it's a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Let's get into your movies that you've chosen for your favorite movies. We were going back and forth over email, and I was surprised that you said, I can't pick between these two. Yeah. Why don't you share with our listeners what 2 films you picked? So
I picked the Robert Redford movie that also had some controversy. It didn't necessarily get the greatest reviews. All Is Lost. I'm sort of an avid blue water sailor, so it goes to me. And it was just about a story of, courage and perseverance and danger and how he dealt with things. And of course, there wasn't a whole lot of dialogue in that movie.
Absolutely. Almost wordless. Really.
Yeah, really, pretty much. Yeah. I probably would have been talking to myself through most of that movie if it was me. But I just thought, and it also, as a sailor, the idea of these floating shipping crates it's a real dangerous thing because they're all out there. They get knocked off of freighters and container ships all the time, and they float. And nobody picks them up, nobody retrieves them. And if you're a smaller ship or a smaller boat, they can put a hole in you in no time. I just thought, and I loved how it ended as well. Can I talk about endings?
Oh, please. Because it's been out for a few years. We can spoil it. Right.
How it ended in that all did seem to be lost. Everything was lost, and then there was a little light. And so at the end of the movie, you don't know for sure, but it looks like maybe he's getting rescued.
So for those who haven't seen the movie, he accidentally lights his raft on fire, trying to make a signal fire.
Exactly, right.
And everything goes up in flames. Yeah. He's underwater, and then in the deep, you see a hand come down.
Yeah,
it's great.
I just sort of like that personal story. I've always wanted to, on my bucket list, is sailing across the Atlantic by myself in a boat that I build myself. So, I built a couple of boats. I love to sail. Who knows whether I'll get to doing this, but it's something that I want to do. So I just could relate to that particular movie.
It's a great selection.
I watched it with my wife, and that probably wasn't a good thing because I'm talking about sailing across the ocean, and she's watching this movie and she says, "No, you're not."
Right. Yeah. It's like when you go on a plane, they won't show a movie where a plane crash happens.
Right,
you don't want to. It's not the best advertisement.
Yeah.
So your second movie that you selected was the 1990 film Quigley Down Under.
Now that's really my favorite film.
That's your favorite.
If I really, I thought about I gave you those two, and I was having a hard time going back and forth, so I went back and revisited them a little bit, and I said, yes, you know what? I've watched Quigley Down Under I don't know how many times. Probably the only person in the world who has watched it multiple times. Yeah. But I just love that.
I have to confess that I've never seen it. I did my research on it, but I've never seen the film.
You have to watch it. It's sort of a, I like old Westerns, number one. It's sort of has some things about being a Western, but it's sort of Tom Selleck at his peak. And but it's in Australia. It has it deals with issues of criminal justice systems, of territories and racism and all these other things, and it deals with them in. I think it deals with them in such of. And even mental health. I mean, there's a whole lot of things in that, but it's just sort of a positive story about this one hero that can address all those things in his own sort of focused way.
Sure.
I just love that movie.
So if you had to pick one performance from that film, would you narrow in on Tom Selleck then? We also have Alan Rickman coming right off of Die Hard for that movie. Yeah, that's a great performance.
I would, and I think probably my favorite moment, and I'm going to forget exactly what he said, but when in the very end when he was drawing against Marston, the sort of villain in the story. And Marston thought he was such a great, pistol shooter and a fast draw. And Tom Selleck had always used this special rifle for long distance shooting. Nobody had ever seen him use a pistol. And in fact, he had once told Marston they didn't have much use for them. And I think when he pulled faster than the other guy and shot him, and he really sort of deserved it, then he was surprised and saying, I thought you said you didn't use it. He said, no, I just said I never had much use for it. And but there were so many great little moments in that movie.
Right.
And people think I'm crazy to pick that one of all the great movies that are out there.
Sure.
But it just happens to be a personal favorite.
That's great. And I saw that line. I watched a clip today, and he says something to the effect of, I never said I didn't know how to do it.
Right.
I just said I didn't need to.
Have much use for it. Yeah, exactly.
And what a great summary of what you're doing here at Cleveland Whiskey, too. It's not that you guys couldn't go the traditional route if you didn't want to, but you're pressing on in innovative ways. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything coming up that you'd like to plug for our viewers in the next couple months? This is going to air sometime in March, and we'd love to get the word out. I would say sign up for our email list, because that's really where we tell everybody. We have open houses every couple months. We normally have a new release for an open house. So we work a lot with craft brewers. We work with some maple syrup farms. We loan barrels out to them. Then we get some of those barrels back so we can create some really interesting, beautiful flavors that are different that we never put out on the shelves. Sure. We only sell them here typically on that one day that we have an open house. Usually we do our open houses on Saturdays from noon to 4, and we'll get anywhere from 400 to 800 people crowding in here. But we do cocktails, we bring in a little bit of food, and always have something different to try and taste. That's great. So, thank you so much for your time and for your two favorite movies, All Is Lost and Quigley Down Under.
My pleasure.
Thanks again.
Thanks.